All right, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us here. I'm Julia White, and my day job is to lead the Azure business, but I have the opportunity today to speak and interview DelBene, who is our Chief Digital Officer. So to give you the full background on Kurt before we jump in, he's been leading cutting-edge technology for 25 years. No, but you joined in 1992, actually, as part of the Windows business. And after many years there, moved over to be part of the Office business, and that's when I actually had the pleasure of working with you. My mic's very hot. I got to know you well there. And then after following that, you actually left Microsoft for a little while.
I did.
And you had the opportunity, I have to ask you questions about this one, leading the Healthcare.gov technology under President Barack Obama, and then rejoined Microsoft as our Chief Digital Officer, and then subsequently taken on the strategy team as well. So that's the highlights reel, but I'd love to hear a little bit about your journey, your background, and particularly interested in the comparison of working in the government for a few years versus back at Microsoft.
Yeah, it's pretty much the same thing.
Oh!
It's not anywhere near the same thing. So as you said, I've been at Microsoft, if you take out the 18 months that I was gone, about 27 years. And mostly in the product group. So I started on this ill-fated, does anybody remember something called Microsoft at Work? Oh, we got a few chuckles.
Couples.
This was an early attempt to put a version of Windows into fax machines, copiers, phones, printers. And it was ahead of its time for sure, and that's being kind to the project. So I shut that down and then worked on the Exchange team for a long period of time, particularly on the clients. What we called Capone at that time, or the Mail client and Schedule Plus, and then moved over when we combined those groups with Outlook and led Outlook for a long time, and then kind of broadened up to the point where when Stephen left, Antoine and I led Office, and then I led the whole thing after that. So mostly in the product development teams. But I did leave in 2017 or in 2013, and what happened is my wife is a member of Congress. And from the Washington 1st Congressional District, what she likes to call the better Washington, but she's biased. And we were looking at Healthcare.gov when it crashed, and looking at the New York Times coverage, and I said, this looks incredibly predictable. And you looked at it, and they had no telemetry. They hadn't actually gone through a beta test period. Everything that everybody in this room would never possibly think of doing, and not telling truth to power, in this case the president and the head of, Kathleen Sebelius, the head of HHS, that this thing just wasn't ready to launch. Right. And so she said, well, would you be willing to do something about it? And next thing that I knew, I was sitting in the Oval Office with President Obama saying, I unabashedly beg you to do this. And I learned later that you actually don't go into the Oval Office unless you're willing to say yes. But I said yes, and so I spent about 7 months working on Healthcare.gov when it crashed. It was a project that was very, very poorly done. What happened at the root of it, they essentially said, Center for Medicare and Medicaid is under HHS, or Health and Human Services, which reports to the president. And they said, we got this, we can do this thing. And it was literally something as complex as building Amazon.com as a consumer website the first time. And they basically said, we can do this. We know how to build it. They were under incredible pressure because what happens is the law gets set and it sets a timeline for implementation. You have this regulatory creation period where you get feedback from everybody, and already they were crunched. Mm-hmm. And then when it came down time to launch, basically, nobody stood up and said this thing isn't ready to launch. And so when it launched, there was basically nobody's applications went through, almost nobody. They couldn't actually tell if any went through because they didn't have enough telemetry to understand if any of them went through. But
there's a lot of lessons learned on this.
There are a lot of lessons learned on that one. But at its heart, there are some lessons for our field. First was that you can get into this mode where if you're a high enough leader, you think you know how to do something and you don't know how to do it, and you kind of have the hubris of thinking you can do it. And the second thing is you surround yourself with other people who think they can do it, not with a critical person who's done it before, and that was one of the issues as well. If you looked at folks at that higher level, there's nobody, take your favorite tech company that had actually built such a thing before that was involved. And then the third thing they did is they said they spec'd out the top-level architecture and then farmed it all out to contractors. And so literally, The user experience was done by a different set of people who did the underlying storage, which were a different set of people who did the identity service. Everything was done by a different contractor, and it all had to converge together, and it was all being led by a set of teams that this is their 1.0. So that is very, very different, hopefully from the experience that everybody in this room, and is certainly different from how we lead things in Microsoft. But there's lots of lessons learned. There's ways to do it in a good way and ways to do it that aren't as good. The last thing I'll leave you with is, I say this fervently, is that these folks that are in public service have incredible intentions and good intentions and are passionate about their jobs. And so there's this whole meme that people that in government service are not as strong technically or not as motivated. That's totally wrong. There were so many people there that were passionate about the purpose of Healthcare.gov and just about doing their job well. So the passion, whether it's in the private sector or public sector, is there and alive.
Got it. But it's about the right leadership, the right
decision making. And I always say it's about having that trusted advisor, that if they'd had one person that could have looked at what they were planning to do in their identity system, for example, and said, you just took an enterprise grade and developed identity system and you're going to use it for an internet sign-in capability. Instead of going miles deep where they could tell you the organizational structure of one of the sign-up people, which they'd never use that field, to something where there's only 10 fields and it is just wicked fast. And so if there'd been that smart person there, and it's true of all our jobs, surround yourself by people who've done it before.
Got it. And different perspectives.
Yeah, and different perspectives, right. And say no to power. If the darn thing isn't ready, you're ultimately going to suffer if you ship the thing. And everybody who was, it is from now on, in terms of the government, they will know the importance of getting IT systems right.
Yeah, I hope that there's one of those projects where you only do it once because you remember, and you're like, I'm not doing that again.
And there are projects that you do it once and you don't get a chance to do it the second time.
It can hit one way or the other. You don't get to do it again.
Right, exactly.
Now, in your role now that you've come back to the company, which I'm glad about, you actually have, as mentioned, both corporate strategy as well as our engineering and operations organization. And from the outside, you can be like, why would those things two be together? But it seems like you've actually found a lot of synergies. It's interesting to see how you do that.
Yeah, so I came back to, I wasn't actually thinking of coming back. I was talking to Satya about some things that I saw that Microsoft hadn't invested enough in. And subsequently, we've piled a bunch of investment in those areas, which is great. But he said, why don't you come back? And I said, well, what would you want me to do? And the first thing we settled on is looking across the company at all the strategy places where things didn't match up and kind of bringing those to our attention as an SLT and kind of driving an agenda with that. And so that,
by the way, is our senior leadership team.
Our senior leadership. And we meet once a week for almost all of Friday. It's a pretty arduous task. And we basically... Any issue that you've got across, you may look at some of the things we do and say, why did they do that? Why is that out of line? Trust me, we've looked at it and we're trying to fix it. Most of the time we're looking at, hey, we have this progress, we need to do more, we need to focus, et cetera. But so I started doing that, and that's actually gone pretty well. I'm kind of as you know, I'm a little bit of a worrywart, a little bit of a highly organized person, so I like lists of things, and I really like to kind of drive things in a clear direction. So I think we as an SLT have gotten a lot better as a result of kind of driving a strategic agenda forward. We were always good about finding all the issues and driving them independently, but now we have a kind of a group consensus. We have these things called, in our solution areas, we have the CSA questions, the key strategic questions for each of the organizations. You work with them a bunch. And we have clear DRIs, directly responsible individuals, and they drive that to a solution, bring that to the SLT, and we talk about it and make decisions. So I started doing that, and then about 2 years ago, he came to me and said, we believe firmly in this digital transformation agenda. Satya came to me and said, I want you to take our internal systems, and I want you to take business operations, and I want you to transform Microsoft and digitally transform Microsoft. And that was all the suggestion you gave me. And so I started thinking about it, and I said, okay, the first thing I want to understand is we have about a $2 billion budget that we have in IT systems and operations together. What's the strategy behind that? And that's where this pairing of corporate strategy with operations starts to happen. What I think happens too often in IT and business operations, for that sense, is we think about we run a process or we run systems. Without, but if you were in the product groups, which is where I spent most of my time, and you could just say, I just have a hammer and all. Everything's a product, and so I think about it as a product. But I honestly think if you recast our work of building internal systems around what is the business process we're trying to enable, and you think of those internal systems as a product, you can bring a whole new light to how you think about things. And so I reorganized the team, made it functionally aligned. So we have dev teams that are full of software engineers. We have program managers that do specifications. We have operations people, although mostly we do DevOps now. And we're transforming this organization into a very product-focused team that says, here's the vision of what the customer wants, and this customer may be an internal folks. Here's what the business process needs to execute on. Here's the relative priorities we have for this year in the business. And here's our execution plan. Here's our metrics of success, et cetera. And so it's been, and that then really does get you into strategy questions like, what is it like interacting with Microsoft? What are the key priorities you need to do to make that a better experience? So the two actually do start to come together.
Yeah. So jumping into that conversation, and we'll come back to some other ones around that, but because on that topic. So you might think Microsoft's a technology company. We have no legacy. You will laugh. I mean, we were a 40-year-old company, 40-plus-year-old company. We have everything on the planet that we've collected over the years. And for many, many of the years, we were very different business groups. You know, we were all under the brand of Microsoft. We were totally different functions and running independently. And so when you say, you know, hey, Satya told you to digitally transform the company. That looked like probably anyone else's company that's deeply siloed, running independently, lots of legacy systems, even though that most people might not know that about Microsoft. That is our truth. So want to hear a lot more about that, taking us from that world to bringing in a product mentality, and what did that look like?
Yeah, so it's a good question. And we are a 40-plus-year-old company, and we have a bunch of systems that are, I know there are probably companies in here that are much older than 40 years. However, 40 years is long enough to get a bunch of detritus in there. And you get into this world where you just say, yeah, it would be too hard to just kind of retire that system. We'll just run it. And we just won't improve it. And by the way, maybe we can save some money by outsourcing it. So we'll outsource the operations for it. That is the worst possible thing to do. And what we found is that you outsource something, you don't understand how what the security posture for that system looks like, all of a sudden you got a problem on your hands. And so we, as part of kind of transforming and getting to be very vision-led of like, as I said, where are we taking these business processes, we also start looking at what are the things we have to stop doing. And we have retired like over 100 systems as a result of that effort of just saying, not only we're just going to put them on life support, we're actually going to take away the life support and get rid of them. Now, one of the things that helped there was we moved to the cloud at the same time. And so we are now running 95% of all of our workloads on Azure. And literally, the stuff that's left is stuff we are in the process of decommissioning. There are some systems we chose to redesign as we move to the cloud. We went through a very deliberate process of saying, there's a bunch of things we want to retire, then there's a bunch of things we like the way they're structured, we just want to make them a VM in the cloud. And then there's a bunch of stuff we're going to make to third parties. So we're actually going to go and take this as an opportunity to go from bespoke systems to actually a third party that's a cloud provider, that's a state-of-the-art cloud provider.
Is there an example of one of those?
We want to, we're going to host SuccessFactors as our HR system in the cloud on Azure.
So versus our own homegrown thing that we have.
Exactly. There's a number of these cases where we have chosen to really rethink things and go with a third-party provider. It also gives you the opportunity to rethink of, there's a couple of people in that HR space, for instance, to choose from. Both of them, we did a head-to-head comparison of the few. We're a very heavy SAP shop. We're probably one of the largest instances of SAP on the planet, and there's a nice synergy there. But it's not an obvious solution. There's other great players there as well. But we took this opportunity. The other thing you learn is that the first thing, if you host it without thinking about one, getting rid of systems, but also figuring out how do I reduce my consumption of resources, you won't get all the savings. And so we spent a bunch of time saying, process by process, what do we want to snooze at the right place? How do we do consolidation? And now we're saving actually a fair amount of money as a result.
Interesting.
But a big part of this process was, basically getting to that point of getting rid of those things and using that movement to the cloud as a way that we get rid of them.
Got it. I want to go back to the decommission process. So I know that's something I talked to a lot of customers struggling about. How do you decide to finally pull the plug on something, and where do you do it? So what process did you run, or how did you evaluate what got decommissioned versus what migrated versus what transitioned?
Well, a lot of what we did was we actually found out how many users were left on some of these systems as well. There's a bunch of them that are they're the walking dead, and those are really easy to decide. You basically got the walking dead that you want to get rid of. You got a bunch of stuff where you say, wow, it is amazing that these things are different systems, and it's clearly historic fact that they're different systems. Yeah. So we have a new vision of what we want to do in this space. We're going to take all of those systems, we're going to decommission them, and we're collectively going to build or buy a system that takes those things together. Okay. So there was a bunch of that. And then there was a bunch of stuff we just said, as I said, these things run perfectly well. We're just going to move them to the cloud as an IaaS thing. One of the systems that we spent a bunch of time working on is what we call MS Sales, which you know well. Yep. Microsoft Sales is a massive system that sits on top of SAP and pulls data out of SAP and then massages it into data that makes sense to Microsoft. So it looks at all customers and says, this is what the sales for this customer aggregated across all of its subsidiaries look like. It then pumps it into another system which does our financial reports. We were running out of scale on our on-premises solution. So this was an opportunity. We looked there and said, we know we're going to be on the biggest possible boxes, and we're not going to meet our SLA to Amy Hood's finance group of churning out the numbers in a certain period of time. So we're going to take the opportunity to actually redesign MS Sales as a PaaS-based product, platform as a service-based product on Azure. So it's really a little bit of each thing. But the other thing you have to do is you just have to say, we're committed to go there. It's going to be everybody, and there's not going to be any excuses for who goes to the cloud or doesn't. And the final thing I'd say is that in parallel with that, we've done a massive decommissioning of data centers. And so we're now in only 2 data centers, and we're going to go to 0. We're going to be, obviously, we'll be in the Azure data centers, even if we have something bespoke. But we have reclaimed a massive amount of just real estate. And some of it we sold off, and other we've just said, hey, we're out of office space. Let's reclaim that to use as office space moving forward.
Got it. I don't want to be in that office, I don't think.
Well, it's a little chilly until we decommission the chillers.
Good to know, though. I mean, one of the really big projects I know was moving SAP to run on Azure. I mean, we are, I think, literally one of the world's largest SAP instances, and you were all in and got this done. So a little bit of how that went, what it looked like, learnings on that, because I know a lot of people are also doing that.
So we are 100% in the cloud on SAP today. We run SAP R3. We're in the process of moving to S/4HANA as we speak. We took, and the solution that we came up with is there's our core ledger, and that's kind of the brains or the heart of SAP. And we built a ton of stuff around it. And the first thing we did was we said there is a strategy that says we can move a bunch of those pieces in turn to the cloud, and they can still communicate back on premises to SAP for the general ledger. And so we started this by, the first thing we could do is take test environments and move. Then we can take some of those peripheral products and we can move those over as well. And then we finally got all of that done. And then we said, okay, now's the time to stand up the separate parallel version of R3 in the cloud. We ran that in parallel for a period of time, and then we shut off the one on premises. We're just about to decommission that. It was February this year. We went to our master being in the cloud. So literally the one that's on premises now does nothing other than being a thing for us to compare against, and then we'll just shut it off.
Got it. Okay. And just curious, I don't know the answer, of how long did that from when you first started migrating the beginnings to to now, I guess?
For us, because we were kind of setting direction as we're kind of uncharted territories. If we started this 3 years ago, but by the time we actually started going with all the tooling existed on the Azure side and we were prepared, it's about 18 months. Got it. So we estimate that any customer of our size could do it now in about 18 months.
Got it. Okay. Well, for that big of a system, not bad.
No, that's actually, I presume people who run SAP, that actually feels like a pretty good timeline or a pretty aggressive timeline. It's a big task.
Yeah. Well, you're living proof it works.
Yes, it does.
Now I want to go back for a second. You started talking a bit about the transformation of your team.
Right.
and going from kind of a service organization to being have that product mindset. I know that was a very intentional thing you brought, but that was a non-trivial change and shift to what you've done. So love to hear you talk about more of that.
Again, it comes down to this whole notion that people say, I always said that if somebody comes to work, they run the system, and at the end of the day, nothing broke, and they think that's a good day, then that's not something that I'm that very excited about running. I mean, coming from the product mentality, you want to be ambitious about where you want to take things. And so one of the things we did was the first thing we did was we pushed the entire team to be vision-led. And that there are obvious places like our financial systems that's a natural thing of like, how do we want to transact in the future? How do we want to move from enterprise agreements that everybody sees today that are reams of paper to being fully digital end-to-end? There's a clear, assertable vision. And if you go from notions of, I want to update SAP to where am I on this path of where digital end-to-end lives, that's a much more exciting thing to be involved in. It goes all the way down. There is not an element of what we work on that doesn't have a vision associated with it. Our security, we very much have a vision. It's founded on some very specific pillars. It is embodied in the software that we use for Microsoft. And if you talk to Brett Arsenault, who's doing presentations here, he'll say, here's our vision around security. Here's our roadmap around security. It's foundational on things like identity and telemetry and securing content, but he will be very clear that those are the pillars of our security story, and that cascades into product plans and cascades in mission. It even goes down to things like our networking team. Yeah. I was amazed when I started talking to the folks who run our network. It says, well, you should have a vision too. And these are people that just provision routers, it's a really hard task, but that's their core responsibility, is keeping our network up. And the person said, well, I do have a vision. I said, I want to be internet first and internet only. And I said, well, tell me more about that. He says, well, we all know that basically our intranets are just festering hives of security vulnerabilities and decreases in performance. I want to get rid of our intranet. I think it'll make us more secure. It'll make us more performant. It'll be faster. And I said, great. So that sounds like the foundation of a vision. Now tell me how you're going to get there. And now the whole running of the network is just a piece of the process of getting to the ultimate vision. And now I've got my network people talking to Brett, my CISO, and saying, yep, we are completely aligned between our security posture, where identity is the cornerstone of our security, and what we're doing with the network. We've then even we're now piloted in multiple offices where there's no intranet. The performance of accessing Office 365 is better because they're not going through this network. And so it really changes the way people think about their jobs, they think about their mission. It is all about executing the vision. You also have to change what your team looks like, because you now go from teams that think about success as running systems to thinking as a product team. And so I now have 5 folks that are part of the LT, and each of them knows that they run a portfolio of products that have a vision associated with them. I'm moving many more people towards insourcing instead of outsourcing. We were about 2/3 outsourced when I took over. We were moving to be 2/3 insourced and 1/3 outsourced. I mean, that comes from Office. We always said we would never outsource anything that was critical to who we are and what we did. And so that's the mantra, where I'm not going to build a bunch of software with third parties when I'm going to have to depend upon that for some of my core functionality. Now, there are some very fine people who build SIs and ISVs, and so I think you basically just have to focus those efforts on places where you are collaborating with them. So we're not immediately going to go towards 2/3 insourced, but we are immediately going to the point where I have developers immersed in all projects, even the ones that I'm outsourced, so that I know exactly what the status is. And then you get to this point of like, okay, now I'm just hiring SWEs. I'm hiring software developers, and I'm hiring program managers. We have a massive hiring underway because it takes a lot of people. Right. And we're, again, defining a functional organization. We are making it clear what the ladder levels look like to become a developer. We're going to fully DevOps, because you basically run the system and you operate the system and you fix the bugs that you introduce into the system.
Got it. Well, I was going to ask you, and I know you're hiring so many people because of that shift.
Yeah.
And as you're hiring and looking for new talent, are you looking for different things, or what's your?
We are. We have gone much more towards college hiring. Now, the college hiring pipeline is only so large, and so we basically went to HR and our recruiting folks and said, we'll take everybody you can give us. And obviously, the Azure guys want everybody they can give them, and the Office guys want everybody. So we're in line with a lot of very august groups. It's amazing the quality of the development team that we've got. We get people from all the top schools, and we basically say the only difference between me and the Azure team is he build, Scott Guthrie's team. They build it for external. We also become a funnel to other parts. We also become a funnel to other parts. We also become a funnel to other parts of the team. So people will start in my organization, they'll move, I don't get office. And from a Microsoft perspective, that's a good thing. But it has fundamentally changed the kinds, as you say, the kinds of people we're looking for as well.
What's working in terms of the vision for it? I recall you saying, that person in your networking team had been there for, 20 plus years, and no one ever asked him what the vision for networking was. He was like, I just provide network. And when you went and asked, and he had this robust vision, but no one had ever asked.
Nobody was listening to.
Right. And there wasn't that mentality, and the leadership wasn't looking for that insight and looking for
And the other thing, this person in particular who led this team, I'm like, holy cow, here's a gem. And just nobody asked this person, like, what do you aspire to? And he runs our network incredibly effectively. And I promoted him very early on in my tenure because I thought, wow, here's a guy I can really count on. You find these gems along the way, the people that, wow, they really got it together, but they've been it's been an old school environment, and they're kind of, beavering away down in the depths of the organization. So you have to find those places where that's the real talent.
Yeah, and I find that truth in a lot of organizations. I think they have to shift all the talent, hire all the people, and I'm like, oftentimes they've never been given permission to do these kind of things or think a different way, but they have all the talents and skills. It's about tapping into them, and I think all of us who lived through between Steve and Satya felt that a little bit of that too, of like a lot of mindset was there, it just no one was asking.
But you can also lull yourself into, you set the course for the team, you say we're going to be vision-led, we're going to be a product development team, and you can get into this point where you convince yourself that it's all about just pivoting them onto the right problem. There is a development of you also have to infuse it with people that know how this is done. So we've taken a bunch of people from other parts of Microsoft that had product development experience and infused them into senior leadership roles. And then you hope that the team starts getting it from osmosis. You look and you say, oh, this person, that's a really critical role. And so far, I don't see this person kind of stepping up and getting the transformation that's going on. And so maybe I have to think about making some moves. It's not an easy thing. It's set the vision, set everything aligned, set the expectations, sit back, see if it's working, see where the holes are. And it has to be an iterative process as well.
So one of the great debates, kind of in a related topic, is should IT be more centralized or should it be decentralized in the business groups? And lots of opinions, points of view. I'd love your perspective on that.
I do have a strong opinion about this, and I'm not sure percent true. So it is a little bit situational. We are fairly centralized in our core services, and I like that model. I like that model from the perspective of if you're going to be a dev team, you're going to have to build pipelines for people to grow in their roles over a period of time. And the other model, and digital transformation, there's pieces of it that are cliche, but the whole notion that the core elements of what constitute our products that all of us are building is changing, and that the software component of it is becoming larger is true. Just take the example I love to use is that during one of the hurricanes, actually down in Florida, somebody was trying to get to St. Pete, and their Tesla ran out of juice. And so they called Tesla and said, I need you to tell me where there's a charging station. And the Tesla guys did one better. They unlocked extra juice in his car and let him get to St. Pete. And they did one better still because they found all the other ones that were in this area, in this situation, and they unlocked it for all of them too. And so this whole notion is Tesla a car or is it a software product? Well, it's really both. And so the question I think for everybody becomes, well, do you want to have software development existing in all of the product teams? Or do you want to have at least some level of centralization because what you want to build is excellence in software development. Right. And so you can think of it balanced both ways. I like the model where we at Microsoft have this center of excellence around building systems for our internal processes. Now, there are certain things we are very much of if we build a product, we should use it ourselves as well. So we by nature have software development going on in core systems going on in other places in the company. But if we were solely a product team with an IT organization, I think there's a lot of merit in that coming together if you do it great. other thing we've done is we related to that, and part of our transformation is we changed the funding model at Microsoft. So it used to be that the IT teams basically got their funding from all the different teams. And because basically, if you don't have a project, and you get somebody that's in one of the product teams or one of the other divisions, if you can get them to green light the project and to give them the funds necessary, you're off to the races. And yet your priority goes straight to hell because you've now got stuff that's way down on the priority list. And you're like, why in the world are we doing that with scarce resources? And they said, well, it got funded.
Right. And on the product side, we know how we could game it. We'd be like, oh, if we just show up with a big check, they'll prioritize my stuff.
Exactly. And so we took all the cross-charging that occurred, and we took it all away from the other groups. Amy Hood was a big supporter of this.
Our CFO.
Our CFO. And we put it all on my team. And now it's our responsibility to say, what is the priority list of projects that need to get done? Do we agree with that? Does the product team or the other parts of the company agree with that? And then we go towards a prioritized list. And we're trying really, really hard not to do cross charges, except for those places where it's a central function and we need to account for the cost that is in each of the orgs. Like if there's a desktop image in a desktop service you have to provide, you're going to allocate that out across the teams, and that's perfectly logical.
And on that, so you have an interesting position where you actually report to the CEO, which is sometimes rare for the chief digital officer, and you have worked with Amy, our CFO, from a funding perspective. So how important do you think that positional power in kind of getting to the place you are?
I think it's really key. That's not to say that it can't work just as well as somebody being, reporting to somebody who reports to the CEO. But I have a very good relationship with all the different peers in the SLT. We collectively say, for instance, I'll talk to Scott about here's what he needs to run his business and to be effective in how you purchase Azure moving forward, and how does that relate to our working on digital end-to-end systems. I will take certain topics as the internal person who works on internal systems, and I'll work that for the entire SLT. And so in a lot of the business transactions, the digital pipeline we're working for transactioning, some of those pieces are in Scott's world, but Satya will look to me as that member of the SLT that will dog that and actually say, do we like this? Is this a plan? You need somebody who's going to be that person that helps give the CEO and the CFO kind of that scale by saying, yep, I'll take that one. It's funny, at the last talk I did, Bob Bajan said, yeah, people like you because you're the person they can give anything to and you'll go get it done. And that is a little bit of, it's like pull these things together and actually come up with a solution. It's that whole write lists, make things come off lists, that kind of obsession with kind of process.
It's a good fit in that one.
Exactly. It can work both ways, I guess I would say.
Got it. But it feels like the funding was an important pivot for you guys.
The funding was super important. That made whole the importance of our internal organization. I also changed the name. We used to be called Microsoft IT. I hated the name. I think that it kind of connotes that old way of thinking. We're now called Core Services, Engineering, and Operations. And that basically says we build the core services that we run the company on. The operations is the business operations piece, which is all of our transaction stuff, which Mary Ellen Smith, as you know, runs under my team.
Absolutely. All right, so we've talked a lot over the past year and here at Ignite too about digital transformation and what it means and all these conversations with everyone, digital transformation. And you've really been at the heart of Microsoft's. And we sometimes talk about the kind of the flywheel of these things coming together. When you get better customer signal, you get better partner signal and getting a better business strength. So I'd love to hear what it's looked like from the core of it.
Yeah, so we've done a few things. For me, there is this flywheel that occurs where if you get it right, you come up with a vision. That vision then gets shared with the business leaders, and it's a different interaction. There's this phrase that has been big in our industry around, I want to partner with the business. And I honestly don't know what that means. Like, what's the partnership that you're going to build with the business? I think what you need to do, and again, it's Kurt's opinion, I think what you need to do is go to the business owners and say, we think we understand, but would like to understand with you what the priorities of the business are. We think we have a vision for where the business needs to go. Now let's present that vision to you and see what you think about it. Let's come together on a shared vision, and we'll go execute collectively with that. So you come in as a partner in the sense of an equal. You bring a set of capabilities to them, and they bring with them as well. It also means we can then go to the product teams, and I no longer, the discussion that I have with the Windows team, the Office team, isn't what it used to be, which was here's a piece of software, we want you to dog food it. And so we dog-fooded stuff at Microsoft that we had no business running internally, that just didn't fit our use case. And so now the product team leaders realize that we're only going to dog food the stuff that actually is part of our vision.
Yeah.
And we're going to, but the flip side is true as well. One, we can be the use case that shows, hey, here's how we secure Microsoft. Here's how it relates to the products we build.
Yeah.
We can also partner with them and say, you know, if you just added these 3 features, this would be a much more effective set of capabilities for us. So for instance, in the migration to Azure, we built a bunch of tools that help us figure out whether we're effectively using Azure. We then went to Jason Zander and said, hey, here's the tools we built. We're happy to give you the code. We're also happy to just tell you this is how it needs to work for our case, and we think it's pretty generalizable. Yep. So you get this kind of flywheel that happens of we're able to tell customers how we use things. That gets us into a good conversation. We're able to tell the product groups, hey, this is how your products could get better, and then the stuff that comes back to us is more tailored to purpose.
Got it.
I'll give you one example,
Yeah.
is the announcement you did around virtualization in your talk with Scott.
Windows virtualized desktop?
Windows virtualized desktop. We love it. And the reason we love it is actually maybe not immediately intuitive, at least not to me. In our journey to get multi-factor authentication and then attestation that all of our devices are secure, the first thing we did was we made sure that somebody couldn't use any Microsoft services on their mobile phone unless we could assure that it's a good device. And so we have now sent 100% of our fleet of personally owned phones now run Intune.
Wait, because there was, when we were...
So I can say this, everybody lives with entitled people. So I can say this, everybody lives with entitled people. So I can say this, everybody lives with entitled people. So I can say this, everybody lives with entitled people. So I can say this, everybody lives with entitled people. So I can say this, everybody lives with entitled people. So I can say this, everybody lives with entitled people. So I can say this, everybody lives with entitled people. So I can say this, everybody lives with entitled people. So I can say this, everybody lives with entitled people. So I can say this, everybody lives with entitled people. So I can say this, everybody lives with entitled people. So I can say this, everybody lives with entitled people. So I can say this, everybody lives with entitled people. So I can say this, everybody lives with entitled people. So I can say this, everybody lives with entitled people. So I can say this, everybody lives with entitled people. So I can say this, everybody lives with entitled people. So I can say this, everybody lives with entitled people. So I can say this, everybody lives with entitled people who feel a sense of entitlement as developers, right? And we got that at Microsoft too. So we got the product groups coming, you cannot do this. How can you run software on my device? And I'm sure you can do all these horrendous things despite the fact that we told them exactly all the limits of anything we can do and the fact there's a great secure process, et cetera. Right. It took us months to get through that. We got through it. And part of the way we got through it is to say, if you really don't trust us, we will buy you a phone. And your phone will work in parallel with you can have your own personal phone, but anything that connects to Microsoft is going to be a business phone, and we'll provide that to you. And 2 people have taken us up on it so far.
2 people out of 100 and some thousand people. Yeah.
So,
just so good data point you can use.
Have faith. If you're trying to drive device, only healthy devices connecting, it does work. But getting back to VDI then, we've been working with the Windows guys to say what we want to do next is if you have a personal device like your PC, and you connect to work, we want Intune to run on that as well. Right. And that is even a more sensitive topic. And so one of the things we've done is we're saying, but we're going to provide an escape valve. So we'll use VDI, and anybody can connect into the enterprise and have a full virtual desktop if they don't want Intune running on their device. But we've also talked to Brad Anderson's folks and said, for Intune to work great, for us to manage the entire fleet, we need these features, et cetera. So it's been a really good relationship there as well.
Been our guinea pig and our first best customer in so many ways from the product team. Not everyone's running a software company, obviously, right. But you certainly have that additional opportunity in that one.
Yeah.
Let's see. Now, you back to the product team, running as a product team. Have you actually taken it to the next step of productizing what you've done? You've talked about handing some code over to like the Azure team and whatnot, but are you literally running a product team in the way you do it now?
We do a couple of things. One, we do co-dev. So we will, for instance, in our identity service, we are very forward-looking in terms of we're all standardized on Azure Active Directory, and there are features that we have needed to move to Azure Active Directory, and we've actually done some co-dev there. We've done co-dev in Dynamics too. We were probably the largest consumer of Dynamics 365. We have about 103,000 users, and we use it as our CRM system, We also use it to process all of our EAs, enterprise agreements. Right. And so when an enterprise agreement comes into us, it will go through a prescribed workflow that is managed by Dynamics 365. It's a system we call Cosmic. And we've taken that solution and then we presented that on the on AppSource and said, hey, if you do business process optimization or automation, this is a great kind of work queue.
Got it.
We've added the ability, like if an email comes into us from a seller that says, I have this problem, we're actually working on the ability to auto-detect what we think the issue is up front and send it into the right queue. We're taking other queries that come with us in physical form, in a letter that's a PDF, and we're using cognitive services to do OCR on that.
Okay.
And then we can, again, detect exactly what we think the state of that, the purpose of that is,
Yeah.
and then shoot it into the right queue.
Got it.
So, we're going digital end to end, but we're even within there, we're figuring out what is the incremental improvement that we can make in our core processes as they exist.
Yeah.
And then we just say, what's the tool that we think we can use for this? And it was Dynamics. Dynamics has been really great for that. And we then do incremental improvements where we see the need.
Got it. So, but there's an opportunity to continue to iterate and put more things out.
Now, what we haven't done so far, but I hold out certainly the possibility, is if there's a fully unique solution that we pioneer, we could just go to Scott Guthrie or we could go to Rajesh Shah and say, hey, we'll do this one end to end. The only way they'll get to the point of doing that is that you show them the credibility that you run your own systems incredibly well, and so it just feels like a natural extension of the product.
All right, last question. I'll open it up for you guys to ask questions, but I know there's always lots of this. So just around the partnership with the business leaders.
Yeah.
And that's an area where I think you've been able to establish with credibility and trust, and that's an area I get a lot of questions about how you do that, what it looks like. So thoughts on that area?
Yeah, I think if you go and you say to your peers or the people in the businesses and say, here's my vision for what I want to do with the organization, and you get them to buy in on that, and you have the credibility of having been in their shoes and understand, and by the way, you're going to make them more successful, and you tell them specifically how, and it's not just a platitude. You say, look, let me show you these 5 ways that things are not working the way I think they could. Let me tell you how I think this business process really ought to run like this. And they go, okay, that makes sense. So you build that trust, I think, over a period of time by making their job easier, making them more successful, and making the business more successful as well.
Got it.
And then I think there are certain partnerships that sometimes you just need reaffirmation from a product leader that says, oh yeah, Kurt and his team, they're doing a great job there. And we get that too.
Got it.
So, but it takes credibility building over a long period of time.
And back to your checklist manifesto approach of you deliver, right? You say, hey, I'm going to do it, and then you deliver, and then, I can trust you more once I see that you've actually delivered on that.
The other thing is Amy, our CFO, has been very clear that we're trying to stay pretty thrifty on cost.
Yeah.
And so as I make this transformation from outsourced to insourced, I have to self-fund that. And so we have a general model that says for every 2 external developers, we will have 1 internal developer, and we think we can make the efficiency work there. You pay them benefits, from a cost perspective. And Amy basically says everything, you're going to have to stay within this budget, and even what we call bow wave, which would be a term well, but basically salary increases. Salary increases have to be self-funded by my team. So, my number next year is pretty predictable. It's the same number that I got this year, despite hiring more people. There are ways to do that. One, if you're more efficient, you prioritize things at the highest. If you're just doing the highest priority work, you can save that money, and I think you can stay within the boundaries. But it's a win-win in that sense as well. There will be a time, and I've told her this, there will be a time where I'll come back to you and say I can no longer stay within those parameters. But then she will know that I've done everything humanly possible to get my costs down. And I'll be able to show her. Like I know, I have these tables of numbers that we as a leadership team went through that says where every single head is allocated in the organization. And I say, people are saying, surely you don't want it down to like 10 people or 5 people. And I say, You tell me where I can look at a number and I can intrinsically know or kind of intuitively know that feels like the right number or not, and then you've got it at the right level. So we've gone through these reviews very deep in the organization with the notion of we need to pull people from here, we need to put them there. That investment seems too high, this one doesn't seem high enough, et cetera. So the other way you drive credibility is you're deep in the details, and I tend to get pretty deep in the details.
Got it. Yeah, you're always buttoned up when there's questions around what's happening and where.
Or I say, I have no idea, but I'll go back and find out.
You're honest either way.
Exactly.
Perfect. All right, we definitely have time for lots of questions. So there's microphones on both sides up here. So feel free to make your way on up if you have a question or an area you'd like to get some more insight about. And while people get brave. Otherwise, I'm going to ask you a few more questions. All right, I'm going to ask one more while we wait. Oh, no, come on up. All right, we got two.
You want to go first?
Folks are always shy at the beginning.
Yep.
That was amazing, by the way. Thank you.
Thank you.
Very, very valuable. So just a question, as you talk about this transformation that you had with your team to more of a product view, I'd be curious to hear how you measured success, right? So from making sure all the trains are running on time and watching the blinking lights to what are you delivering, where's the innovation, how are we moving things forward? Like what were some of the measures and things that you did to drive that kind of behavior and that performance?
Well, part of it is the visceral feeling that you get of does the team feel different. This has been an incredibly energizing transformation for our team because they see that, oh, I understand what I'm contributing to Microsoft. It is more creative to think from a vision perspective. So first and fundamentally, it's just the organization feels well. We actually do polls, and you can find out we're pretty numbers oriented. So I can say we have an LEI or leadership quality index, and it's rated to everybody at a certain level of the organization, so people feel free. By the way, they're not shy about telling you when they don't like what you're doing. So there is that whole, the energy feels better, and it's tied to the poll that happens. But the second thing we've done is in every area, we have done a very clear connection between the goals that we have and the metrics that will measure success. And so, friends, we've gone down to the point where meetings, we have something called the Healthy Meeting Index, which says how often were people able to call, that a call was not dropped, that people were able to enter the conference within a period of time. That goes all the way up because we said in the collaboration space, we have these priorities of improving the quality of meetings, improving the quality of finding information at Microsoft. That was another piece. All those things came from a poll that we do to everybody in the organization that says, how do you feel about the services that are being provided? So it's all about being really clear on what the needs are in the organization, the vision you're trying to deliver, the product roadmap, and getting really clear on the metrics that are going to measure your success ultimately. And we've been very focused on that.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Mm-hmm.
You chipped around the edges on this a little bit earlier, but could you talk a little bit more about how your journey to the cloud impacted your organization, right? So did you have a vision for the organization before you started that, and does it align with where you ended up?
Yes, we did. So one, we just wanted to be modern. We wanted to say that the systems that we're running are systems that we need to absolutely run for the sake of our business. Second, coming from Microsoft, we believed that the cloud would create better operational rigor and better scale for us. Think about none of these workloads. It's crazy when we have this thing called MS Sales, and we just can't buy boxes big enough to run this thing under our SLA. And the SLA is what we give to the teams that need MS Sales numbers to come out in a certain period of time. So partially it was around operational rigor, partially it was around security. We firmly believe, and I'll debate this to anybody, we will be more secure when we move to Azure, because we have all of Scott's team that they're maniacally focused on making sure that's a secure environment. They're providing better tools than we would do ourselves. It's kind of like the difference between, are you going to be and this is not meant pejorative, but conceptually, you think about it, we're amateurs at some of these things that there are other people that are that's all they think about 100% of the time. And so I inherently believe that we would get better security out of this as well. And so those are a lot of it around scale, around operational efficiency, and effectiveness and around security were kind of the key things. We also, in our particular case, we needed to be the hallmark of running on Azure too. So that probably doesn't exist for you guys. And then there's a bunch of, in the operational rigor area, we get to see like, here's a dashboard of every single process that's running across the company. We get to see all the ACLs and the credentials that everybody has, and we can manage those centrally. A bunch of those things were just added benefits all around kind of operational rigor.
But one just to add on to your question, because I get it a lot, is but what happened to your team? Like what they do, their roles, like their functions, like from the people on the organization
Yeah.
to move to the cloud. Is that
We were, if that's part of the question, we were able to attrit people who were basically rack and stack boxes internally, but we'd also outsourced a bunch of that. So a lot of the attrition that happened, you'd outsourced anyhow. And so we actually have not had a huge amount of turnover. Most of the people were pretty energized about it, and I have a core platform team that runs, for instance, our SAP implementation, our network, et cetera. There's been a transformation of kind of in that area what resources being allocated to what, but I don't think I lost a lot of people. I got people more energy and now they're driving towards a clear vision. I'll give you an example. In the SAP case, we're now deeply working on what our telemetry needs to be for SAP and how we get to a place where it's not deploy SAP once every 6 months and worry that you can do it in that amount of time, but how we could get the agility of speed of which we deploy SAP instances and updates to be much, much faster. So that now they can start focusing on the things that they actually think are value added.
I'd say as a consumer of your technologies, whether it be RMS sales or SAP systems, I've seen the usability, the experiences around it go up and be more user-friendly. You get mobile apps for things now that you guys could never provide before because you had different resource allocation, right? So the people now, instead of racking and stacking, are now providing business experiences that make my job more productive and experiences better, which I've been excited about. So.
Absolutely. Yeah.
My question is, what keeps the chief digital officer awake? Is it the competition? Is it the changing landscape? Is it the legacy?
Oh, what keeps a chief digital officer awake? Wow, that's a tough one. Everything.
He told you he's a worrywart.
I am a worrywart. I rewrite an issues list all the time. As Lee's in here somewhere, he receives it and has to actually track down all the issues that are on it. But the things that I worry that we don't move fast enough still. I see the enterprise agreements that we put all of you guys through and just say, it is a weird process today. You basically, it doesn't quite work this way anymore, but like an account person would crack open a pen when they started doing an agreement with, and that's old school. We've already moved, for instance, parts of Azure onto the whole digital stack, but I worry we're not moving fast enough there. I am incessantly worried about security. I'll tell you, when Healthcare.gov crashed and I came in, the first place I went to was the security team. Because I thought, if we have a security breach and there's personally identifiable information, that is totally the end of Healthcare.gov. And I say this independently of, some of you in the room may think Healthcare.gov is the worst thing in the world. If we as an organization and government and people are going to have such a thing, it ought to be well run. But the whole notion that security breaches, we have massively increased the security posture in the last 2 years I've been here. Part of this is a DevOps thing too, because now all of our code goes through a single pipeline. It doesn't go through the SI's pipeline, it goes through our pipeline. We do screens that search for secrets that are embedded in code. I guarantee all of you guys have code out there that has secrets in it that can be discovered by perpetrators. We do things like we actually phish internally very proactively, and I always get somebody shooting an email, is this a phish or not? Is this you guys or somebody else? But I worry a lot about security. That keeps me up at night. Keeps me up at night of like saying, now that we're focused like with our seller tools, I worry about us just being competitive with everybody else's seller tools. And I have a point of view of what Judson's sellers need to have, and I'm like, God, we got to get there faster.
Thank you.
Thanks for the question. That's a good one. Yeah.
Gary with JB Hunt. Just wanted to touch on your comments around moving from like a back office services function to product orientation. And I would say from my company's perspective, we've absolutely made that change from back office IT support to everything's aligned to products, whether it supports an internal customer or more importantly, external customer.
Yeah, in your industry in particular, there's a lot of transformation going on. Trucking, right? Long haul trucking.
From your perspective, where do you think the Fortune 500 are in that product alignment with technology versus traditional IT support?
I think it's a pretty mixed bag, and all of you could, can talk about it from your own perspective. I think there are some companies that are very forward-leaning. We just had, Julia set up we do these things with the SLT, the senior leadership team, where we bring customers in. And customers, sometimes they tell us how they're using our products and what they wish they could get from us. Sometimes they say how they're using the competitors' products and what you'd have to do to win their business. But usually they say, and by the way, it's not winnable right now because we're perfectly happy. So we had one that came through Shell, which is a very good customer of Microsoft. I've been the executive sponsor for the Shell account for a number of years. It's gone from it's been passed from person to person. Wonderful customer. That's a company that they're very vision focused. They actually get to the point where they have a worldview of where they think energy consumption and energy production will be 25 years from now. And that informs how they think about their investment in renewables versus their in petro-based products and the chain from the beginning, from discovery of resources all the way to delivery to the customer. The folks that are in their IT organization, I think you had a discussion with them earlier, they very much said, and unabated when we're talking about the presentation they would give as part of Scott Guthrie's keynote, said it's got to talk about us being vision-led because they believe it. I remember one of their kind of tech folks, he came to me 10 years ago and he said, let me show you my blueprint for where we're going in our internal systems. So that's the case. That's one of the cases. I get a lot of folks who say, I run these systems and I don't have any money to improve them, so I have to live within the means that I have. To those folks, I would say, I think you will save money. I think if you winnow down what you need to do versus not, and you start disappointing some people saying, I'm not going to be able to deliver that now because I'm getting my house in order, and I actually think I'm going to deliver better for you in the future, I think you can actually make things happen even when you're in an earlier state. But I think this notion, and you guys, others should tell me, I think this notion of being vision-led and product-oriented is a new thing, mostly a new thing over the past 5 or so years. So I think we're sort of early in our transition overall. Thank you.
But I do see, just to reflect on that point, the customers I engage with, the ones that are stuck are the ones who can't decommission. And that's why I asked you that question about how you did it, because you're in that bind.
Right.
You can't shift resources, and you're always, kind of beholden to that.
Right.
So then you can move to a more.
And you got to toss off some things. And sometimes you toss off things they don't even know you're doing for them anyhow. So
you can be braver than you
I will say, and the other thing that has raised in importance for us is compliance. And I never thought compliance would be a sexy thing, but it is the coolest thing. I know this is crazy to say this, but compliance is cool. Because if you think about compliance as the search for things that you didn't know you were non-compliant on, and tearing apart your systems end to end to find those places of vulnerability, it can actually be a super interesting and scary place. But compliance is something I think we can all up our game on as well.
So I think this was a wonderful story with a lot of learnings around how you take in digital transformation in Microsoft. But this is new to a lot of customers and a lot of people thinking about, you have a great background from product development and it's all software driven now. So I think that's really applicable. But what were some of your biggest surprises? Things that, because it sounds when you tell the stories like, yeah, we did this.
Oh, perfect. There was no mistakes.
What are the biggest surprises that you didn't see or didn't think of?
There's probably a lot of them, and it has definitely not been as smooth. I get excited about it, and that's why it comes out that it all has worked out really well.
He's got scars.
I do. I think you get pushback from the product teams as well. You get them saying, I want to control things and own things because that's the way that I control my destiny. And so this notion of coming to them with partnership and saying, look, you're being inefficient here. We've got a couple of them going on around supply chain. People wanting to build their own supply chain systems. And how many supply chain systems does a company need? And so there are a lot of places where you have to break through. I think partnering with CFO is a great thing here because Amy is really hardcore. And she says, I am not paying for 2 supply chains. Or I'm not paying for 2 of this. And there's lots of examples of this. So I think that partnership has been good. But this whole notion of really partnering and getting them to agree that they're going to do less so that you can help them more has been a hard one. As I said earlier, I think this idea that you can just set the vision for the team and reinforce it over and over again does not necessarily get you past the difficult things, like there's things that have to change in terms of who you have in certain roles. And that always becomes a really hard thing. And you can lull yourself into the view that the progress that you're making is enough, and yet you look at it and it'll come back and bite you a different way. Like we had somebody really critical who left the team. I'm like, oh my God, I thought that guy was completely secure. And what was happening is he was just being beaten up by other teams as he went to them and said, we need a common data architecture. And I'm here to help pull these things together into a common data architecture. And eventually he just got tired. And so you have to energize the team, and you have to be, it's going to be a marathon as much as it is a sprint along the way as well. I think building people's capabilities has been a hard one. I think I don't know about the rest of you, but we had this kind of personality of bullying that happened in the organization, where these old school IT folks they willed by the virtue of the strength of their voice and the strength of, like, you don't know how it works, let me tell you how it works. And I've just been very intolerant of that. I've talked about it in team meetings and saying, I will not accept this. I've gotten emotional about it and saying, this is just not how we're going to act as an organization. But that whole old school thing has been a hard thing to develop or to break past as well. So it hasn't, oh, and then, you got all the security kind of, ooh, what happened there? Oh, it's not so bad, but God, then you see all the issues and you got to fix all the issues too. So definitely has not been smooth sailing along the way. Thank you. Thanks for the question.
So thank you very much for sharing of your experience with us. I have 2 questions and 1 remark. Which one do you want to listen first?
You choose. I got some good news and I got some bad news.
You're talking about huge transformation. And when you talk about your budget and discussion with your CFO, it sounds to me very traditional, because he is putting just budget. You even have to earn additional salaries for your team within your own, while you should talk to him about values and not the costs.
And if you want me to just answer that one, she is all about saying, I want to know the ROI. Like she's a broken record on that one.
So why is the discussion about budget?
Because there's more than one management tool you can use.
So
and basically, it does feel antithetical to say, like, hey, why just arbitrarily cap it? But I actually believe with her that because we haven't been run as efficiently for a long time as we could have been, that there's some fluff in the organization that I can weed out by focus. And so, as I also said, though, I'm going to eventually go to her and say, I can't live within that budget anymore. And I'm going to be able to tell her the particular projects that I'm funding. Right now, we have an above the line and a below the line. So I can tell you, the first yes, and I can tell you the first no, which is exactly what we used to do in office. I said, tell me what your first no is. And I'll look at it and say, if that's in the Word team, I really need that feature, so I got to go find you more resources. And if it's in another team, I can live without that no. And so you gotta, I think she's using an effective tool, which is like a blunt instrument, but she knows eventually she trusts me a lot, she knows I'm gonna come back, and I haven't come back yet.
Now, one of the most effective tools is to say, for every good plan, we have money.
For every good plan, we have money. Tell that to the Wall Street.
Yes. You are going to change the Wall Street mindset, am I right?
I'm going to focus on executing our business well.
Great, thank you very much. The second one, so a question, your job title is very long. So
it is, isn't it?
So what is
There's a story behind that.
There is a story behind it, of course. What is your first important task, which you say this is really the one and only in all those job titles?
Boy.
Life's not that good.
I'll tell you, I just had my review with Satya, and it's very much of a dual role in his view. He thinks that our corporate strategy team has done a good job in focusing the SLT on the most important business decisions. And then he said, and your team has done a good job in terms of digitally transforming and making that clear for Microsoft and delivering the value there. Now, he also had some opportunities for my improvement, of course, but so he doesn't think of it that way. So I think you've created a tyranny that I'm not going to get sucked into. A tyranny of choices.
Yeah, okay.
But the name, I will say, and I'll apologize to folks who love the Chief Digital Officer. I didn't love that title, and I took a little begrudgingly. I think it's it's a little new age-ish to me, and I actually think the whole organization needs to be digitally transforming. So I don't know how you really have a chief digital officer, but I understand that it has to be imbued with some responsibility there. So I actually, my title started as EVP, which is just a positional thing. I led corporate strategy. I transformed the name from MSIT and Ops to Core Services Engineering and Ops. And then later, our chief people officer came and said, we think you ought to take the CDO title. So there's the chronology.
Okay, thank you very much. Last question.
Yeah.
So when you're sitting there, as you think that everything goes as you think it goes. So the whole transformation, cloud, creating a new tools, getting and keeping actually the right talent in your organization. But when you go deep in your organization, probably things are differently than what you think. How do you actually manage that feedback loop from what's happening on the work floor and what's in your mind and your talk?
That's a great question. One, we do have a poll that people are very honest about saying at an aggregate, at a statistical level, whether they're happy. And there's about 100 questions. No, there aren't 100. It's 70 maybe now. They tried to winnow it down. The second thing is I do listening lunches. And so I take random people throughout the organization. Every month I bring them together. And they have some pattern to them. So there'll be early in career development people, or there'll be women in the organization. There'll be groups, diverse groups. And I'll just ask them a set of questions. And the other thing I emphasize is my door's always open. You know how to reach me. I still think you don't hear everything that's going on. And I've had to jump in cases of like, oh my God, I can't believe that that's happening in the organization. And then you use that one-to-many communication, like saying, this is unacceptable. This behavior cannot continue, and set a norm for the whole. But it's a mixture of things. Thank you.
One comment on the budget thing, and I think you've done a good job of it, but it's a tool, if you use it, of that flat budget, forces you to prioritize and break through things when we've had duplicative systems or different fiefdoms, and you can use that budget to drive the right behavior and break those things. So
absolutely,
you embrace it.
Amy hasn't been shy about saying, I'm not funding that because I know there's another one over here, for instance. Yep.
Zil Ahmed from Chevron Phillips Chemicals. My question is regarding the rate of change in which Microsoft is moving toward their digital transformation, right? Versus what the organizations are going through and where they stand, right?
Yes.
So it kind of feels like that, the pace that you guys are going, it's really hard to keep up with some of the services and products. And it's kind of like, you can kind of expect that there will be time where some of the service is going to start decommission, right? Like especially on-premise service, especially with respect to the cost side of things. So how do you, what's your recommendation or strategy is in terms of for organizations to just keep up with the pace, or how do we do our digital transformation?
I think if you, again, being focused on a vision of and actually getting out in front of Microsoft's vision, of saying, what's going on in the industry, how it relates to your investments in Chevron Phillips, right, it is now. And so you have a view that you come to us and say, this is where we think things are going, and making sure that it aligns, and so it's more of a one-to-one discussion. I think that helps a ton. I think the more you proactively are figuring out what your vNext architecture looks like, and you're moving towards it rather than being settled on the existing architecture without a notion of where it's going next. I think we see some cases where, and this is an industry that's moving, I've never seen it, I've been in the industry a long time, I've never seen it move as fast. This transformation that's happening I talked in a speech that I gave earlier, all of our revenue is massively transforming now, and we're no different than any of the other providers. And so we're balancing this, provide all the new capabilities that people are asking for as fast as humanly possible, at scale and at high quality reliability. At the same time, we're trying to keep everybody working with the traditional products that they've had in the past. But I think the more that you can get out with a proactive view of what you think it'll look like, then you can ask the right questions of us. I also think there's an expectation you can have of us, and it's easier done if you have the view of what you need from us, of saying, now you tell me when this is going to be here. And you in particular are a large enough customer, and I hate to, I think it's right. You need to go to the folks, the people on the account side of Microsoft and your executive sponsor and say, look, this is where I'm going. Now you tell me how that matches up. But we all live in an environment that, oh my God, the rate of change is amazing. It's fun, but it's also a little harrowing.
Cool. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, Kurt. Great info. So my question is, you've talked about it a little bit, which is, some of the projects that you insource and some of the projects you outsource. My question is, sort of, you have a formula when you consider the two, and then second is, what do you look for in an SI when you go out and you look and you want to hire someone? What in particular kind of tells you, yeah, they might do a good job?
Got it. So in terms, each of the teams in my LT, they have a priority list. And it's typically driven by the essentialness of the functionality and things like security risk, et cetera. And so we are absolutely moving back into the point where the systems that are absolutely the most core for our business are the ones we're going to insource the most rapidly. We are also, your second question around which SIs, there are, we've kind of coalesced around a set that we can negotiate great rates with. We kind of have one throat to choke, although we have multiple throats to choke, but we want to know that these SIs are in it with us. We have a particular instance where there's a partnership. How good are they? It's not a quid pro quo, but we have partners that are like betting big on Azure. That means they have the right skills. That means they have skin in the game to be with us in this kind of thing. And then we also need to partner with them so that they're not at arm's length and just saying, no, we'll take that for you. That feels bad to me. I want somebody coming to me saying, this is a partnership. We will let your developers in with us to see exactly what's going on. It was very similar with the Healthcare.gov, where you had to, Accenture came in afterwards to help us clean up. And the work they did was really good. And it was a partnership. We were in with them. We were doing code reviews. And you need that kind of relationship, too. Great question. Thank you.
All right, our last question.
Perfect.
And the best question, hopefully.
Exactly.
I'm from Norway, and I feel like you have corp, and then you have the subs. So what are your thoughts around culture when it comes to digital transformation in such a big company?
Where do you work in Norway?
Microsoft.
Oh, you're at Microsoft in Norway. Oh, okay. I wonder whether you're Equinor
He's an insider.
Oh, so I just want to find out where I'm coming from here. It is a hard thing. This is more of a Satya question than I think it's a Kurt question. But I think the thing that we have done better with Satya, what's that? Is this me? No, I don't think it is. I think we have done a better job in saying that there's a certain culture that we have as an organization, and that we're going to truly live that culture. And this whole notion of the growth mindset, Satya truly believes it, and we in the SLT believe it, and it is fundamentally different than how Microsoft has operated in the past, where we're saying we don't know anything, we're going to be open to figuring out what the answer is. And so I think it's kind of the ties that bind us, and culture is that thing that has to be real, and we're making it more real under Satya. The whole idea, I love it when he says, God, we have to move here as an organization, and perhaps I'm one of the people who has to move there the fastest because I have issues here too. And so I think we can be bound by this collective culture that says, who are we as an organization? I also love his comment, which I had slightly wrong earlier today, but this whole notion of if you want to be cool, go somewhere else. If you want to make other people cool, come to Microsoft. And so there are these few things that can really bring us and galvanize us together. I think the hardest thing that we have is an industry that's moving so fast, keeping all of you up to date on all the plans, up to date on how you best serve the customers. And the only thing I would say is we know it in spades, and we're trying to fix it as much as we can. And it's a race. We spent a ton of time in the SLT last Friday talking about, and I think this is something that you guys announced, this new education platform.
Microsoft Learn.
Right. And Satya talks about, hey, maybe I should have all sellers and all people in the field be accredited in Azure. I'm like, I'd sign up for that, but that's a real challenge. And that, you guys are all real busy folks, but it has to be this. We all have a kind of standard lingua franca that we talk to and that binds us together. Well, thank you all for being fantastic supporters of Microsoft.
Yeah, thank you, Kurt. And if you wanted to hear more about our internal journey, we do actually have our Microsoft IT Showcase website where you can hear Kurt's stories, among other things, too. So that's also publicly available. So thank you so much, and thank you, Kurt.